Julian Assange is one of the greatest journalists of our age. He spent his entire adult life bringing previously concealed facts to the public about what our leaders are doing. That is the very definition of journalism. Yet Julian Assange is not a hero in America's newsrooms. He's an enemy. Assange made the mistake of offending the media's real constituency, which is not the public, but the powerful. For doing this, journalists accuse Assange of being what they are, a political operative posing as a reporter. In 2010, Assange and his organization, WikiLeaks, published an enormous cache of secret documents that revealed what the US government had been doing. At one point, the Pentagon claimed the video didn't even exist. Assange proved that it did. A few years later, Assange upended a presidential race by publishing a trove of internal emails from the Democratic Party. Democrats claimed the emails had been hacked by the Russian government, but they hadn't been. That was a lie. The emails had been leaked from within the DNC itself, almost certainly by a disgruntled employee. Those emails proved that Hillary Clinton's campaign had rigged the 2016 Democratic primary against Bernie Sanders. It was the scoop of the decade, but it was only one of many that Julian Assange broke. For the crime of upstaging them and embarrassing their patrons, servants of power, embarrassed governments around the world agreed. The government of Sweden, acting in concert with British authorities, charged Assange with a fake sex crime. He's a rapist, they said. Global media amplified the lie. Ultimately, the charges were dropped for lack of evidence. But by that point, Julian Assange was a prisoner. He'd been driven into internal exile in the Ecuadorian embassy in London, where he sought political asylum. He spent more than 7 years there, unable to leave. Then, in 2017, Assange broke his last big story. WikiLeaks revealed the existence of an illegal CIA spying program. Assange withheld most of the details of that program so as not to compromise American national security. But the story was still deeply humiliating to the CIA. In Washington, CIA Director Mike Pompeo decided to murder him. Pompeo discussed with his deputies how the CIA might kidnap Assange from the embassy in London or poison him inside. That is not conjecture. Multiple witnesses heard Mike Pompeo say that. At the time, keep in mind, Julian Assange had not been charged with any crime in the United States. Mike Pompeo considered it a death penalty offense to embarrass the CIA. You may be asking, is any of this legal? Can federal appointees use tax dollars to kill people who annoy them? Well, not technically. Mike Pompeo committed a felony, conspiracy to commit murder. And yet somehow, Mike Pompeo is not in prison. Instead, he's the toast of the donor class, a friend and advisor to the most powerful people in America. It's Julian Assange who's in prison for the crime of offending Mike Pompeo. Assange is currently being held behind bars by the British government, which has not charged him with any crime. Assange now sits in the most fortified penitentiary in the UK, Belmarsh, where every murderer in London is held. He's been there for more than 4 years, trapped in solitary confinement, cut off from his wife and 2 children, wasting away alone among killers and mental patients, and awaiting extradition to the United States for trial. Assange has been charged in the U.S. under the century-old Espionage Act, a transparently unconstitutional law which is used almost exclusively to punish political crimes. Yet Julian Assange has never committed espionage. Nor does the U.S. government have any real interest in trying him under that law. His current incarceration is the whole point. Torture Assange to death in jail so he will never again speak publicly. It's all so grotesque and so immoral that it's hard to believe it's actually happening in public view. Belmarsh authorities will not allow Assange to be interviewed, lest his case bring more embarrassment to the CIA. But we decided to travel there to see him anyway. It's early in the morning, the sun has just come up. We're driving through London to Belmarsh Prison to see Julian Assange. We're with his wife, Stella, in a bus. It's raining. And we're going to try to get through the cordon of maximum security guards and administrators to see him, not for an interview. No cameras are allowed, but for a conversation. How hard is it to get from the gate to see him?
Well, it's a process. So initially, you're in an external building called the Visitor Center, and they check your ID, and they take your fingerprints. They give you a badge, and you have to leave everything behind. Everything. I mean, you can't take a watch or a handkerchief or anything like that, a pen. And then you go into the main building, And then there are airlocks, so you go through the first airlock, they take your fingerprint again, they check your badge, look at your VO, it's called visiting order. And then they let you through to the kind of airport security area. So you put your shoes, your belts, jacket on in an X-ray machine. Then they check you first with you go through an arch. Then they check you with a wand under your feet and front and back. Then you go to a pat-down search, and they look inside your mouth, behind your ears and your hair, and then pat you down under your feet as well. And then you can put your shoes back on. Then you go through another airlock, and then you cross a yard, and then you get into the interior building. Check your fingerprints again. Then there's a dog search. And once the dog search is through, then you're through to the visiting hall where they take your fingerprints again.
Are you filled with rage toward the people who are doing this?
I'm beyond rage, you know. I think I don't understand the cruelty. I mean, I don't understand how people can be human beings and actually go along with it or drive it, you know. I don't understand how a human being can do this to another human being. And just the effect it has on Julian, what is being done to him, you know. He doesn't have contact with the outside world, and the little contact he has is with, you know, very serious criminals, and violent people, and, you know, dangerous people, and that he can't be with his family, that we're only able to see him a few hours, 1 or 2 hours a week. It's just, you know, it's kind of, rage doesn't describe it, because I'm in the middle of it, and I just cannot understand it.
So we're going into prison to be fingerprinted 4 times and searched and sniffed by dogs in order to visit the notorious terrorist criminal Julian Assange, who has not actually been charged with anything. We're heading out. Oh! Say a prayer.
So we're gonna do a sit down, but any quick thoughts?
Well, that's just a total outrage. I mean, it's a total outrage that they're holding that man who hasn't committed or even been charged with a crime in this country. I mean, that's a, you know, maximum security prison filled with murderers, and the people who reside there, the inmates, are treated like animals. And he's not an animal. He's a journalist who has committed no crime. And so anyone who's in favor of that, anyone who supports his continued torture, is your enemy. He was the enemy of free expression, of free speech, of the basic liberties that used to define the United States. So, you know, the people who support that should have to answer for it, in my opinion. It's disgusting what they're doing. Disgusting. Assange looks like press photographs of him, maybe older, pale. He hasn't been outside in 13 years. Bearded, longish hair. He's a big man, tall. He seemed better physically than press accounts had led me to believe. I keep reading that he's ailing. I'm not his doctor. I just spent, you know, a little over an hour talking to him, but I thought he seemed very focused. He seemed much more cognitively dialed in than I was led to believe. Dressed in gray sweatshirt and sweatpants, prison issued. He's a prisoner. All the prisoners in the room had fluorescent yellow armbands to signify they were the prisoners. And, I was very focused on the conversation with him because there's a lot I wanted to ask him and a lot I've been thinking about as I've watched his case over the last, almost 20 years. So I had a lot of questions, but it was hard not to notice, if you've never been in a prison meeting room, there's a lot of human drama unfolding all around you. And little children, he has little children, he and Stella have little kids. And it's just, it's heartbreaking to see prisoners with their children or their wives. And as someone who's been married for over 30 years, the idea of being separated from your wife for any period of time is, it makes you feel claustrophobic thinking about it. We talked about why he is in prison, and my first question to him was, what do you think this is actually about, since you haven't been accused of a crime? And he said something that really struck me, and I think, having spent my life in Washington, is absolutely right. He said he first became famous when WikiLeaks published documents and videos that the U.S. government had kept secret from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. They were gravely embarrassing to the Pentagon. But that wasn't the red line. The red line was several years later when WikiLeaks published information about surveillance by the CIA. And so I asked him directly, are you aware of anyone being harmed or killed on the basis of information that he published? He said, of course not. And he said it in a sincere way. Like, by the way, I think if people were killed because of his publishing, because of the stories that he put online, he would feel bad about it. He seems like a humane person. He withheld information about CIA because he didn't want to get people hurt. He famously published the contents of Hillary Clinton's email account going back to the late 2010s, 2009, 2010, as I remember. And there were enormously embarrassing details in these emails, including the texts of her suck-up speeches to Goldman Sachs. And at the time, she was pretending to be a friend of the people or whatever. This was really damaging to her, and she was enraged by it. And he was also at the center of really one of the baffling stories of our time, which was the leak of the emails from the Democratic National Committee, which were blamed on Russia. Russia clearly had nothing to do with it. There's no evidence Russia had anything to do with it at all. And I think there are quite a few indications that those emails were leaked by a DNC employee who was mad that the Hillary Clinton campaign was being helped by the DNC and the Bernie Sanders campaign was being hurt. Very interesting. Very interesting story with a lot of lying and potentially some other things. But I asked him, when you published these emails, did you realize how powerful Hillary Clinton was? And we had a conversation about that, and I said, looking back, do you regret doing that? He goes, honestly, it was fun. And it was pretty puzzling to watch. Whatever else January 6th was, and in some ways we still don't know exactly what it was not a Trump-led insurrection. The crowd had no guns. They had no plan to overthrow the government. Nothing like that has ever emerged. And above all, Trump was not leading it. He was miles away at the White House at the time, where he issued a public statement calling for calm and nonviolence. So why were the people on television telling us that Trump led an insurrection? This was, of course, a lie, but it was also a very obvious lie. So clearly we were watching the rollout of a talking point, words crafted for a specific purpose. But what was the purpose? We got an answer to that question yesterday when the Colorado Supreme Court ruled that because he led an insurrection, Donald Trump's name cannot appear on the state's ballot next fall. The 4 liberal judges who concluded this cited as their justification Article 3 of the 14th Amendment, which was written in 1868 to keep former Confederate officials from holding office. That was the sum total of their reasoning. Despite the fact Donald Trump has never been convicted by any court of insurrection, and although the 14th Amendment specifically does not apply to the presidency, Donald Trump cannot run for president because he's an insurrectionist. This seemed like lunacy, because it was lunacy. 3,000 miles away in El Salvador, there was no question about what was happening. The United States has lost its ability to lecture any other country about, quote, democracy, wrote Salvadoran President Nayib Bukele. And yet in this country, no one on the left dared say that. Instead, Donald Trump's enemies celebrated. The Atlantic magazine expressed gratitude that unelected judges had, quote, rescued the country from the desires of voters. Because actually, That's democracy. And then there was Jenna Griswold. That's the Colorado Secretary of State. You may not have seen her before, but you will instantly recognize the category she represents. Unhappy 39-year-old liberal women with Ivy League degrees and a deep streak of authoritarian impulses. Here's Griswold on MSNBC last night explaining that a conventional legal process is no longer necessary for the left to get its way. No more trials or evidence or jury verdicts. An accusation made on television is now enough to remove a frontrunner from the presidential race. If Nancy Pelosi and Joe Scarborough call you bad, Americans are not allowed to vote for you. Watch.
Look, I believe he incited the insurrection. There were big questions around Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, and the Colorado Supreme Court has weighed in a very loud way, making themselves clear. Frankly, we've never had a president try to steal the presidency and engage in insurrection ever before. So Trump's actions are unprecedented. The Colorado Supreme Court confirmed that the district court got it right, that he did engage in insurrection. I think Section 3 of the 14th Amendment has to apply to the presidency, because if not, it's a get-out-of-jail-free card. And in a country of laws where no man is above another, we can't have one office be able to do whatever they want when it comes to rebellion and then be able to be seated in office again.
None of this seems very American. All of it, and has been buying a lot of expensive designer clothes, even a car. I'm worried my daughter will fall into the same trap. How do I prevent this? Too late. Too late. You raised a girl whose best friend is selling her body for money. You raised a girl who might even plausibly sell her own body for, quote, designer clothes. So I'm assuming she's over 18, or else this is all a felony and you should be in jail. But it's not fixable at this point. If you raised a daughter who's so shallow and greedy that you didn't suggest she was starving here, that she was selling her body to buy cornmeal. You said she might sell her body to buy a car or designer clothes, whatever that means. Some marked up garbage made in Malaysia. She would sell her body for that? You blew it, man. You were a bad father. And by the way, what have you been doing that she's been hanging around with this other prostitute? You said nothing? Hey, your best friend is the kind of person who might conceivably sell her body online for designer clothes? It's totally cool. Have fun tonight. You guys going to the movies? No. That's when you take her and say, you know what? I think whoever this woman is, Caroline, might not be a good person. But even then it's too late, because you've raised a child who would even consider that okay. So all is lost for you. I think the best you can hope for is to pay the cover and go see your daughter 5 years from now on the stripper pole, because you've lost complete control and it's your fault. Thanks for tuning in. Ask Tucker, the truly